revolved around the title, Affordable Housing, the Next Growth Frontier. Firstly, I'd like to invite on stage our session moderator, Mr. Sachin Nigam, President, CRISIL Real Estate Ratings, to kindly come on stage. Let's have a round of applause to welcome him on the stage. And joining him, I'd like to invite our next set of esteemed panel members. May I please invite Mr. Rajesh Krishnan, Chairman and Managing Director, Brick Eagle. May I further invite Mr. Rahul Nahar, Managing Director and CEO, Zerbia Developers. Mr. Sriram Mahadevan, Business Head, Mahindra Life Spaces Happiness. Mr. Nitin Goel, Partner, Milestone Capital. And Mr. Ashok Chhajer, Chairman and Managing Director, Arihant Superstructures. Now, I believe we can really have an enthusiastic round of applause from all the members of audience to welcome our panel members for our first panel discussion. And with that, I'd like to hand over the proceedings of the discussion to Mr. Nigam. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you indeed. As they say, everybody dreams of a home. And for many of us, that dream remains a dream. I guess the biggest issue over there is the pricing and the way they have moved up in the last many, many years. Fortunately, we now have a segment wherein there is a lot of thrust that is coming over, which is on the affordable housing side. And I think we have a distinguished panel today comprising of eminent personalities who do funding of such projects, to eminent personalities who are very, very active in this particular space in terms of construction and stuff like that. So, gentlemen, good evening and welcome. And over the next maybe half an hour, we will deliberate upon various aspects related to affordable housing. And to kickstart the entire session, if I could kind of, start off by getting your perspectives that today it is very, very clear that we have a huge amount of demand in this particular space. And obviously, there is a lot to be achieved as well. What do you think are, maybe one or two enabling policies or provisions that will help us to take this particular initiative forward and give it a big flip and give it a big booster? So maybe we can start with you, Raj.
Look, clearly there'll be a laundry list of things that we would all like.
Right.
But if I have to pick just one, I would say approvals, right? So for a start, I mean, India ranks some 183rd out of 185 countries surveyed on ease of getting approvals. I mean, it's not a great starting point, right? Approvals has two problems, right? The first thing is, of course, the fact that there's a 2-year delay in getting approvals. And now cost of money is like 30% on an average for developers' equity. So it's cost prohibitive for developers to actually do affordable housing if it takes 2 years to get approvals. And the second big challenge, which I think doesn't get talked about often, is transparency and governance. See, there are a lot of development finance institutions out there who are willing to fund affordable housing projects, right? And there are billions of dollars available from these guys at very attractive rates. And one of the reasons we don't get enough of that capital is because of governance issues. So by definition, a developer is expected to do dodgy things to go and get approvals. That's a fact of life in India today. And knowing that, essentially a lot of this clean capital shies away from affordable housing because they have to choose between infrastructure projects, funding blind schools, and they have so many other development agendas which are available to them, which are equally compelling. Right? Do you fund cancer research or do you fund affordable housing? By the way, you don't know how your money is going to get used. So I would say single window clearance for approval will be the #1 priority to make affordable housing possible in the country.
Right, thanks. Mr. Rahul, you've been at the forefront of several such developments. What is your perspective on this?
I think, as he rightly said, approvals is the biggest hurdle today. And typically in approvals, I think environment clearance takes a lot of time. But by the new government coming in, I think they have streamlined the process. And now I think, the clearances will come fast. And hope so that, the problem gets solved. But the biggest hurdle, I think also is approvals.
So we spoke about approvals, we spoke about the transparency and governance aspects. What would be some of the other things, Sriram, if you could give us your perspective?
Well, Sachin, both the other earlier gentlemen, they have actually hit the nail on the bud. The success of this affordable housing business rests on low margin, high volume with a quick turnaround.
Absolutely.
And that quick turnaround in execution typically is from the day you buy the land to the day you exit the project. And for every year delay in execution, the IRR comes down by 9 to 10%.
Right.
And that is the only carrot which is there in the affordable housing business vis-a-vis compared to the conventional business, because the return on capital employed can be higher than the conventional if you are executing it fast. If that itself is under question, then it's a big problem. Apart from that, if you ask me, there are, as you said, there are laundry list of things which are enabling to this affordable housing business. One of them, surely I personally feel, should be relook at the development control regulations which are specific to affordable housing. What we currently have is a copy-paste of normal conventional housing rules which being adopted for affordable housing. That won't do. For example, just to elaborate my point, say a setback norm of 6 meters in Chennai. I don't know why it is there. A strict parking norm, I don't know why it should be there in the first place. So these are certain things I think if people are serious about it, then they should be looking at it and they should be redrafting it right from scratch rather than trying to knock off certain items from the current DCR.
Right. So some kind of bespoke, tailor-made policies, and stuff for the segment. All right. Nitin, maybe.
I guess, people before me have covered most of the things. What I can think of is, when we look at projects, and, we have funded a few of the affordable housing projects as well, is, people start with affordable housing and then, they do phase 1, and by the time they get onto phase 2 or phase 3, they actually forget that they wanted to do affordable housing and they get into, maybe luxury, or if not luxury, premium kind of a housing. So I think from an organization perspective, you have to stay true to the course of, doing a project which you want to do. And, it requires a mindset change right from top to the bottom in an organization. So, you have to tailor-make your organization to work efficiently for a affordable housing system. You can't have luxury projects and, affordable housing projects, or maybe, so to say, low-cost housing projects, and, have a mix and match of that. So I think their delivery is very important of, like Sriram said, volume is key, and
right.
So you have to kind of ensure that that's how it works. And delivery and efficiency of production is equally important. I guess so that's one, and the other one I feel that, somewhere in the system we need to be more innovative in terms of financing and the cost of financing. I mean, for funds like us, if we look at, mid-20 IRRs and banks are lending at 15 or 14% for construction finance, and you have delays on approvals, margins being so thin on affordable housing projects, you're literally wiped out if your project is delayed by a couple of years. So the cost of financing overall has to go down, and even for mortgage rates, and we need to find an avenue as to how people who don't have, so to say, a proper financial statement can access financing from an institutional setup at a low cost. I think that's another area which I feel would really boost affordable housing.
Yeah.
We can have a look from other perspective also. The affordable housing majorly can be brought into existence by the role model of PPP by all the governments, state governments. As this large stock of housing requirement till 2022 cannot be met by the government organizations in alone, and so PPP projects would be the major aspect which should be looked forward. Maharashtra government started it off way back in 2008, but could not get the implementation into place. Many reasons known to all of us. I would say the intent, and If we see the other states, they have adopted it, the word affordable housing, which was floated by government of Maharashtra, and Rajasthan was the first which brought out the best policies in affordable housing policy, wherein in PPP projects also, different models, the projects had got into implementation and execution. Yesterday at Naredkot conference, the finance secretary, Mr. Sandhu, who was the urban secretary in government of Rajasthan, who had made the schemes very viable and implemented, had seen it across. This has been also adopted by today the government of Gujarat in a large extent. They had been inspired by the state of Rajasthan. So PPP would be the thing which has to be brought into existence, where the government needs to see that the person A who is coming in, maybe a developer, maybe a financer, he is a partner to the product, and that is how only we would be able to achieve up the affordable housing. It can be also termed not only as affordable, but majorly into a low-cost housing, which caters to the EWS and LIG, which is the 50% of the requirement today across the country. So to differentiate today between affordable from different segment of income groups, it would be the low-cost housing, A, and it would be affordable, which would be left out to the developers who would be having their own sale product.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point that you mentioned in terms of PPP, and maybe I'd just like you to elaborate a bit more. So for instance, in some of the states that you mentioned, you've seen some success coming out of that. So what do you think are the two most important aspects of those partnerships that have contributed to that particular success?
The government policy should be drafted out by keeping into mind that the objective of the government is to achieve the target of getting houses which could be delivered by the ULBs, and not look into it that what a developer would be getting out of the whole project. If he is not getting anything, he is not going to get in. So the time the officers or the policies start looking into it, that the developer or the participant is getting a big bloom out of it, then they will deviate that policy and will not be able to achieve that target.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Nitin, you mentioned about the fact that, cost of funding such projects and all of that. What are the key challenges that you face? And after Nitin, I'll get your perspective as well, Rajesh. What are the key things that as a funding person you face in terms of challenges and in funding such projects?
So, one obviously from our perspective as a fund, we have raised money from investors and we need to deliver a certain IRR.
Right.
And so in any project that we invest, that's a key parameter for us in terms of what returns can we make. And as a consequence, we look at projects which have margins and project IRRs of say upwards of 30%, which may or may not be the case in an affordable housing project. So that's one. Secondly, our experience is that, perhaps while we all are able to estimate and maybe project revenues on an optimistic basis, we are not so good at cost estimation. And, by the time the project is kind of done and dusted, you realize that the cost overruns have literally, squeezed out all the profit margin. So which is an area of, concern, and when we try and underwrite a project, we try and, maybe perhaps, assess the cost a little bit more in detail and look at, what the kind of design is and where can we kind of cut cost and maybe value engineer. Cut cost is not the right word, but value engineer and keep the design simple to minimize the cost and perhaps look at standardized design and, floor plates so that the turnaround can be faster. But overall, I guess, it's a systemic issue where the cost of capital is high, and affordable housing as a, if we really have to give it fillip, we need to, as a industry, need to figure out how to kind of reduce it. So.
And so your point is that because the margins are thin, any cost overrun or a time overrun tends to wipe off the margins very quickly. All right, Rajesh?
I think this topic deserves a PhD thesis actually, but I'll try to kind of sum it in a couple of minutes. I guess there are a lot of things that comes to mind when you talk about funding affordable housing. But for a start, let me write off this whole bucket of housing finance. I think until we get our Supply Act together, we should not focus on housing finance. In fact, the government is already giving lots of SOPs, interest rate subsidies and all kinds of things to, in a way, increase demand, which doesn't make any sense to me. I think we have to kind of focus on supply first. Otherwise, we're just going to add to the asset bubble that we're already having anyway. So the question really is, how do you fund affordable housing projects to increase supply? So broadly speaking, I'm thinking there are two things, right? First is, what can the government do? I think that, to be fair, the government is trying, right? They're kind of taking some of the hurdles from FDI and stuff like that. But one of the key things that they can do is basically increase bank financing for affordable housing. So broadly speaking, getting bank funding for real estate in general is difficult. But then the government actually came with a policy a couple of years back saying for social housing, I mean, he calls it low-cost housing. I prefer to call it social housing, housing below 10 lakh rupees, right? Which is where, by the way, bulk of the demand is. When we say India is short of 20 million homes, all of that is in the less than 10 lakh segment. And I don't think anybody here is thinking about supplying in that segment, which is like in the 5 lakh kind of price point, right? I think a lot of us here touch 10 lakhs, but the demand really is in the 5 lakh segment, which is not profitable, right? But then the government came with a scheme which said that if every single unit in the project is priced at less than 10 lakhs, and if every single house is sold to somebody of economically weaker section, then a bank loan to such a project qualifies as PSL, which means technically speaking, the bank should lend at 8-9% for such a project. As far as I know, not a single project in the country qualified. Right? So I'm saying you got to kind of make policies that are actually practical. I mean, clearly, they came up with some good thoughts, but it didn't work, right? Because it's difficult enough to get a project together where every single unit is less than 10 lakhs. Now you can't even sell it to investors. You can't sell it to a middle income segment. You got to find somebody who's making less than 10,000 rupees a month as your buyer, right? So it's just not practical, right? So I'm thinking fundamentally the government should figure out how to increase funding access to affordable housing and in a way encourage banks. PSL I think is like the best avenue to kind of encourage banks to fund affordable housing. The second thing is, in a way, I think in our control, right, as a community here. So if you think about it today, yes, the government has kind of decreased some of the hurdles to getting FDI into the country. The fact is FDI is not jumping at it. They're not kind of rushing into the country, with big checkbooks, which is what we saw in 2005, 2008. Right? Today, as far as I know, not many people are actually looking at us seriously, despite the best efforts of the government. Right? And in a way, we are ourselves to be blamed for that. Right? India, real estate are bad words in the international investment community. Sorry to say that. And in a way, the fact is, half the guys who came here lost their shirt. Right? And we have sent a very bad signal. Some of it was, of course, market. We went through one of the worst market conditions after the bull run, right? So that is part of it. But I think what really turned them off was more on the governance aspects of it, right? When things go wrong, how do you react to it, right? Do you turn away from the problem, or do you kind of stand there and address it, right? And a lot of us here turned away from the problem, unfortunately. So I think it's going to take some time for international community to come with large checks into real estate in India. Right? Having said that, I'm very bullish on the prospects. I totally agree with the chairperson's remarks. It's a $2 trillion opportunity, and I don't think international community can stand there and watch this wave go through. So I think they're going to come, but I think we got to get our house in order before they come.
So there is a lot of fundamental shifts that we have to do to make sure that we roll out the red carpet for. Okay, I think there were a couple of other points that were touched upon, and maybe I'll get some perspectives from Rahul, from Ashok, and from Sriram. So one of the things that would mentioned is the key to success also is the fact that you have to drive economies of scale, right, in order to keep your costs down and all of that. So what's been your experience in this aspect? What are the hurdles that you face in this, and what are the success stories that come out of it?
basically you need economies to scale because typically affordable housing we do on the outskirts of the city, right? So when you go to outskirts, the ecosystem is not ready there. So typically the land, is not at very high cost. So you can get a big land parcel and basically you can, because the scale is large, you can afford to, deploy some new technologies for construction, for speedy construction. And of course, I mean, in affordable housing, one typical thing is that you have a huge number of customers. So you need a very strong backend to manage them because housing is a emotional product and the customer needs to be handheld right from the start to even after the possession. So many companies actually don't focus on it so much because if you're doing a project in a city, typically, the project is small and, the developer, he himself can manage the CRM part and look into it. But when the number of customers goes beyond like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, then that CRM challenge comes into play. So that is the thing, where we need to have those